soon-to-be commander-in-chief is promising to cut corporate taxes, meanwhile, and roll back regulations. So how do healthcare leaders think their companies will fare under a Trump administration? I want to bring in the CEO of Merck right now. Ken Frazier is with me, and it is a delight to see you again, Ken.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I know you've got really important things going on with regard to Keytruda in oncology and Januvia in diabetes, and of course what you're working on Alzheimer's. So I want to get to all of that. But let me start with the Trump economic plan, tax reform. Sure. Do you think it will get done this year?
I believe it will get done. I think for a long time there's been a consensus on both sides of the aisle that the U.S. tax system, the international tax system, is not one that makes U.S. companies globally competitive. And I think what's being discussed, particularly under Paul Ryan's blueprint, makes a lot of sense in terms of a territorial system.
Donald Trump met with Paul Ryan yesterday. We don't think anything new came out of the meeting yesterday, but apparently he's talking about a 20% corporate tax rate. Donald Trump is talking about a 15% corporate tax rate. When you look at that, down from 35%, highest in the industrialized world, does that change behavior? Does that make companies invest more in people and R&D?
Well, I think the rate is important, but the most important thing is the territorial system. In other words, U.S. companies today are being taxed for their profits overseas. And what that really does is it gives an incentive for people to keep money outside the country. If that money could come back on a regular basis and be employed on things like IP, be employed on expanding plants and expanding employment, that would be a good thing.
What about the Affordable Care Act? People want to know how it's going to change, and a lot of debate going on right now that we can't repeal it without a replacement. What should a replacement look like?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen is we have to maintain coverage for all the people who are covered under the current Affordable Care Act. I think beyond that, I think people really ought to say, what is it about it that we want to keep? From our perspective, for example, we want to make sure that patients have affordable access to the medicines that they need, and that they can see doctors when they need to see doctors. So let's preserve the part of that Affordable Care Act that gave people meaningful access.
Do you think it should be repealed? I mean, it's been expensive for corporate America, we know that. Are there areas that should be repealed?
Well, I think everyone agrees that there are areas that can be strengthened and improved,
right,
and people think there are areas that should be preserved. So, for example, the Republicans say they'll continue to allow children to stay on until they're 26 years of age. There are a number of things that are going to be preserved. Whether you call it repeal or not, there'll be parts of it that are kept, and there'll be parts of it that will be strengthened and improved.
When I spoke with Steven Mnuchin recently, the incoming Treasury Secretary of the Trump administration, he said we're gearing up for 3.5% to 4% economic growth. All of these changes, whether it's the Affordable Care Act, tax reform, rolling back of regulations, the whole priority is 3.5% to 4% economic growth over the short term. Is it doable?
Well, I think that our economy is very strong. And I think there are a lot of companies that can invest in growth. And so I won't speak to the 3 to 4% because I'm not an economist, but I am very optimistic that America will be open for business and that American business will compete globally.